Welcome to another deep dive. Ready to explore how randomness really impacts our lives and markets, and even how we think about success.
Sounds fascinating.
Our guide this time is Fooled by Randomness by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. And by the end of this, I'm hoping you'll walk away with like a totally fresh perspective, one that really recognizes the power of chance and helps you make smarter decisions.
Taleb really challenges how we view skill versus luck, particularly in areas like finance, where randomness is just rampant. It's easy to mistake luck for talent.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on that. How often do we see someone just killing it and
Yeah.
assume they've like figured it all out? But Taleb tells this story about two traders, Nero and John. It really made me think.
Oh, yeah, I remember that one.
Nero is like super cautious, data-driven, a real quant kind of guy. But his neighbor, John, lives this lavish lifestyle. It seems like he's just playing hunches and making these risky bets.
Yeah, it's that classic setup. John looks wildly successful on the surface. Big house, fancy cars, the whole 9 yards. And it's so easy to think, man, he must know something Nero doesn't.
Exactly, but Taleb uses that to show how deceptive short-term results can be.
Right, because if we could rewind life, like hit the replay button with all the random events, would everything turn out the same way?
That's his alternative histories idea, right?
Uh-huh.
That's mind-blowing. Like, imagine playing life out a million times, like a simulation. Maybe John gets totally wiped out in some versions, while Nero's steady approach actually wins over time.
Exactly. Makes you question everything about how people become successful.
Seriously, like
Yeah.
when we look at someone who's made it, we tend to tell these stories about their brilliance and their hard work. And yeah, those things matter. But Taleb's point is, we often miss how big a role chance plays.
Right. It's not that hard work and skill don't matter. It's that luck often gets overlooked.
So it's not just in finance then, right? This applies to so many things. Like how we see success in general. Maybe some of those overnight successes were more lucky than skilled. And some failures just got a bad hand.
Exactly. Taleb makes us zoom out, see the bigger picture.
So instead of jumping to conclusions about why someone succeeds or fails, we can try to factor in the role of chance.
It's humbling, but it could also be kind of freeing.
Yeah, it makes me think about another thing Taleb criticizes, that obsession with economic forecasts and all those expert opinions.
Oh, yeah, he really goes after those.
He's super skeptical about all those pronouncements in the media, especially when they try to explain every little market movement with some big narrative.
It's like they need a story for everything.
Remember that story Taleb tells about the economist Robert Shiller?
Yeah, he was ridiculed
Yeah.
for predicting the dot-com bubble, just because the market kept going up for a bit longer.
It's like they thought he was wrong, just because it hadn't happened yet.
It shows how hard it is to predict something as complex as the stock market. There are just too many variables, many of them totally random.
It's like those talking heads on TV. They always have an explanation for why the market did what it did. But what if? Sometimes there's no big reason. What if it's just a bunch of random events, kind of colliding?
That's what Taleb suggests. We crave order and predictability. So we latch on to explanations, even if they're just stories we tell ourselves.
Just to make sense of the chaos.
But accepting randomness doesn't mean we give up trying to understand things. It means approaching it with more humility and being aware of our limitations.
So if we can't really rely on predictions, how do we make decisions? In a world that's ruled by chance, I know Taleb talks about Monte Carlo simulations, but those seem pretty complicated.
You can be.
Can you break them down for us?
Okay, so imagine running 1,000 versions of your life. Instead of focusing on just one predicted outcome, you get a whole range of possibilities. The simulation takes into account all those random factors that could influence the result.
So instead of saying, if I do X, then Y will definitely happen, you're running a bunch of what-if scenarios.
Yeah, exactly.
That's really insightful. You can actually see how different random events could lead to completely different outcomes.
And that's where it gets interesting, because you start to see the potential for those extreme events, the black swan events. They catch everyone off guard.
So it's not just about the average outcome. It's about those wild, unpredictable events that can totally change the game.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got unpredictable markets, random events shaping our lives, and the chance of black swans lurking everywhere. How do we even wrap our heads around all this? And more importantly, how do we make decisions when we can't even count on predictions?
That's where Taleb introduces this idea of skewness.
Skewness.
Basically, it's the idea that some situations
Yeah.
have limited upside, but a lot of downside.
So you might make small gains consistently, but then one huge loss wipes everything out.
Exactly.
He uses some pretty scary examples, like those investors who got crushed in the Russian ruble crisis, or the people who kept betting on the Mexican peso, only to see it crash again and again.
Those stories really highlight how ignoring skewness, that potential for a catastrophic loss, can be disastrous.
So if our brains aren't wired for randomness, how do we avoid these traps? It feels like we're fighting against some serious evolutionary baggage.
That's a great point, and it's something Taleb dives into deeply. He argues that our brains, which evolved for a much simpler environment, aren't equipped to handle the complexities of modern markets and probability.
So we're trying to navigate a world of supercomputers with Stone Age tools.
That's a great analogy.
So our brains haven't caught up to the modern world. What kind of problems does that create when we're trying to understand randomness?
Well, for one, we're prone to all sorts of cognitive biases. We tend to overemphasize recent events, see patterns where there are none, and cling to narratives that give us a false sense of order.
So even when things are random, our brains try to force them into a pattern.
Exactly. And it gets even trickier. When you consider the problem of induction, can we really learn from the past and apply those lessons to the future, especially when randomness is always at play?
It's like that saying, correlation doesn't equal causation. Just because two things happen together doesn't mean one caused the other.
Right.
How does Taleb deal with that?
He advocates for something he calls naive falsificationism.
Naive falsificationism.
Instead of trying to prove our theories right, we should be looking for evidence that might prove them wrong.
So it's about constantly testing our assumptions.
Exactly. It's about being open to changing our minds.
Yeah.
When we see new evidence, and recognizing that in a world with randomness, we can never be 100% certain.
Okay, we've covered a lot. Randomness in the markets, how it shapes our lives, how our brains misinterpret chance. It's a lot to take in.
It is, but it's also incredibly empowering. When you start to see the world through this lens, it can change how you approach everything. From investing to your career to just everyday life. It's a real shift in thinking. Taleb even challenges that classic idea of survival of the fittest.
Right, you'd think. In a totally random world, the most adaptable would thrive.
This is what Darwin taught us, right? The strong survive. But Taleb has a different take. He argues that sometimes what seems like an advantage in the short term can actually lead to extinction in the long run.
So even evolution can be fooled by randomness.
In a way, yeah. Like a trait that helps you win one challenge might make you vulnerable to the next one, especially if those challenges are unpredictable.
So it's not just about being strong or smart. It's also about being lucky. That changes how we think about success.
Definitely.
If a random event can wipe out even the fittest, it makes you wonder, what actually works over time?
That's a great question. It's why Taleb stresses the importance of long-term thinking. It's easy to get seduced by those quick wins, but if they come with the risk of a huge loss, you might be setting yourself up for failure down the line.
It's like building your house on sand.
Exactly.
He also uses that birthday paradox to show how easily we can be fooled by those seemingly improbable events.
Oh yeah, that one's classic.
I remember reading it and thinking, no way that can't be right.
It is counterintuitive, but in a group of just 23 people, there's more than a 50% chance the two of them share the same birthday.
Wow.
It shows how our intuition about probability can be way off.
And that applies to so many things.
It does.
Especially data analysis. Taleb talks about how we're prone to finding patterns in large data sets that are actually just random noise.
Yeah, it's like seeing shapes in the clouds.
We're imposing order where there is none.
Exactly. That's the risk of data mining without a clear hypothesis.
If you search through enough data, you're bound to find correlations that seem meaningful, but are actually just statistical flukes.
It's like playing the lottery. If enough people play, someone's going to win.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean they have a system.
So those aha moments,
Yeah.
when we think we've found a hidden pattern, might just be random.
It's definitely something to watch out for.
Taleb seems to be saying we need to be more skeptical about data analysis.
Yeah, more critical, more cautious, especially when we're drawing conclusions from limited data.
So it's not just about understanding the data, it's about understanding the context too.
Exactly. And that leads us to another key concept, nonlinearity.
Nonlinear.
It's the idea that small changes can have huge effects.
Like the butterfly effect.
Exactly. A butterfly flaps its wings in Brazil, and it causes a tornado in Texas.
It's crazy to think that tiny events can trigger such massive consequences. Does Taleb have any other examples?
He mentions Cleopatra's nose.
Mhm.
The idea is that if her nose had been just slightly different, it might have changed how people perceived her beauty, which could have changed history.
Wow. That's almost scary to think about. It makes you realize how much is really outside our control.
It's definitely humbling.
If Cleopatra's nose could change empires, what does that say about our ability to predict anything?
It's a good question. But Taleb's not trying to make us feel powerless. He's encouraging us to embrace the uncertainty and learn to adapt.
So how do we do that? How do we live in a world where so much seems to be driven by chance? Do we just give up?
No, not at all. Taleb's not advocating for giving up.
Okay.
He's saying that by understanding randomness, we can actually make better decisions, manage risk better, and appreciate those unexpected things that happen.
So instead of fighting against the current, we learn to surf the waves.
Exactly.
But how do we put this into practice? What are some things we can take away from Taleb's work and apply to our lives?
Well, one thing is,
Yeah.
we can stop looking for guarantees. Where there are none, we can accept the idea that success is often a mix of skill, hard work, and a good amount of luck.
And we can start to think about randomness when we're making decisions.
Yeah, consider not just the most likely outcome, but also those black swan events. That could totally change things.
So be prepared for the unexpected
Right.
and don't get too attached to any one outcome.
Exactly. It's about being adaptable and resilient.
And what about predictions?
We can learn from the past, but don't assume history will always repeat itself.
The future is unpredictable.
That's not a bad thing.
Okay.
It just means we need to be more flexible and open to new possibilities.
So it's about embracing the adventure,
I like that.
not knowing exactly what's going to happen, but being ready to roll with the punches.
And learn as we go.
It's about seeing the world, not as a predictable machine, but as this complex, ever-changing system where randomness is a fundamental force.
Exactly. And that's what makes life so interesting.
If we knew exactly how everything would turn out, wouldn't that be boring?
Definitely.
Randomness adds that element of surprise.
It keeps things interesting.
I'm starting to see randomness in a whole new light.
It's not just about bad luck or unpredictable events.
Right.
It's also about those serendipitous moments, those chance encounters that can lead to new opportunities and unexpected discoveries.
I think that's one of Taleb's most important messages.
What is that?
That by embracing randomness, we open ourselves up to a whole world of possibilities.
It's about letting go of the illusion of control.
Right.
And becoming more adaptable, more resilient, and open to those unexpected things that life throws at us.
I think this has been a really insightful deep dive. We've gone through some pretty complex ideas, but I hope our listeners walk away with a new sense of wonder and curiosity about the world and their place in it.
Me too.
So to wrap things up, what's one key takeaway you want our listeners to remember?
Remember that randomness isn't something to be afraid of. It's a fundamental part of life. It shapes our lives, our markets, and even how we think about success. By embracing it, we can become more adaptable, more resilient, and more open to those unexpected good things.
I love that. It's about seeing the world with new eyes, recognizing the role of chance, and navigating life with a sense of curiosity and adventure.
That's a great way to put it.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into randomness. We'll catch you next time. It's like we've had this crash course in randomness, from the markets to evolution, even like the weirdness of probability. But it's not about being overwhelmed by chaos. It's about using this knowledge to actually navigate life better.
Right. There's a whole different way of looking at things. Instead of trying to control everything, we can learn to be okay with uncertainty and just adapt to what comes our way.
So what does that look like practically? How do we actually bring this understanding of randomness into our everyday lives?
Well, think about those times when you're feeling stressed or anxious
Yeah.
about stuff you can't control,
Yeah, like what?
like a job interview, a big presentation, or even just like the uncertainty of the future.
Okay.
Instead of trying to make those feelings go away, just acknowledge them.
Okay.
Remind yourself that some randomness is inevitable, and that's okay. It's part of what makes life interesting.
Right. It's like instead of stressing about all the what ifs, we can focus on what we can control, our preparation, our mindset,
Right.
our ability to adapt.
Exactly. And accepting randomness doesn't mean giving up on planning or goals.
Yeah.
It just means being flexible
Yeah.
and adjusting our course. Like when you're sailing a boat, you have a destination,
Yeah.
but you got to adjust your sails
Yeah.
based on the wind and the waves.
I like that analogy.
Be intentional, but
Yeah.
also adaptable.
But what about those times when randomness throws us a curveball? Those unexpected stepbacks or disappointments?
Yeah, those are tough.
How do we deal with those?
Instead of seeing them as failures, try to see them as chances to learn and grow.
Okay.
Ask yourself, what can I learn from this?
Hmm.
How can this make me stronger?
So it's like reframing those negative experiences as valuable lessons.
Exactly. Find the silver lining. Even when it feels like everything's going wrong.
Because randomness can also work in our favor, right?
Definitely.
Sometimes those unexpected things can lead to good stuff, new opportunities, or even just a change in perspective.
Yeah, that can totally change your life.
It's like that saying, when one door closes, another one opens.
Oh, I like that one.
We just got to be open to seeing those new doors.
And walking through them.
Exactly.
I think that's the beauty of embracing randomness. It lets go of that need to control everything and opens us up to all sorts of possibilities.
So it's about accepting that we don't have all the answers. We can't
Yeah.
predict the future, and that's okay.
More than okay. It's what makes life an adventure.
This has been a really insightful deep dive. I hope our listeners are walking away with a new sense of wonder and curiosity about the world.
You too.
So to wrap things up, what's one key takeaway you want everyone to remember?
Remember that randomness isn't the enemy. It's a fundamental part of life. It shapes so much. And by embracing it, we can become more adaptable, more resilient, and more open to those unexpected good things.
I love that. It's about seeing the world with new eyes, recognizing the role of chance, and navigating life with a sense of curiosity and adventure.
That's perfect.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into randomness. We'll see you next time.